imagination. But I can't understand the Lion Man without understanding the context in which it's made. So I did some of my own investigations into why it might have been made, where it was made, and what it might have been used for. And what you can see here is a reproduction of the Lion Man that was made using exactly the same tools and techniques as the original. So it's carved away with flint. It would have taken months and months and months of carving to do this. And when we're thinking about a prehistoric society where survival is everything, where food gathering is everything, to have an artist take time out of that routine to create something like this must mean it had value and it had some sort of role to play within prehistoric society. But what role did it play? I wasn't quite sure. And then we started just sitting on the rocks outside the cave in Stadel. And I was with the artist, so he didn't mind me doing this. But we started to tap away at it because it is, of course, made of a hollow mammoth tusk. And it has acoustic qualities. But even the artist that made this reconstruction didn't know this until this moment. So what you're going to see is a moment of real wow between the two of us where we go, I can't believe it just did that.
Fantastic.
That's amazing.
Really.
Genuine reaction to a moment of discovery. So although this isn't the original Lion Man, that is in fragments and it is in a case and it has to be protected, this exact replica has an acoustic quality, which you know, intuitively we should have known this because it's hollowed out. It is you know, an object that has different layers of thickness, but it wasn't until we did this that we realized it. And that became an issue of context again for me. I'm often criticized by more scientifically minded people for constantly reading ritual and symbolism into everything. That partly comes from the fact that I am a medieval art historian and there is symbolism and ritual in everything. But I actually think that it's easier to connect with people across the globe and to really try and understand cultures and different viewpoints if you look at their ideological framework as an introduction. So I put the Lion Man into historical context. We went to the cave at Hollenstein Stadel. You can see it here. It is a remarkable space. It's truly one of those spaces where you feel you are crossing a divide. It's liminal and you're moving into an underworld space. And as the common misconception, these caves are not for living in. They serve some other function. And across this area of the Swabian Jura, at around this time, 40,000 BC, there was an explosion of creativity. You can see these other beautiful artworks that were found down the road in Hohlefels and in Vogelstein. Here's the horse. Look at the movement. It's a tiny, tiny little horse like this, but it's got so much dynamism to it. You can feel the twist of the horse's mane. And then the remarkable woman of Hohlefels. It is, again, very, very small, but it is the most extraordinary depiction of a real living body. But what I find really special about looking at the Lion Man in an art historical perspective is when we put it into context, the things that were found alongside it included the earliest known musical instruments. Down here, you can see a flute, and a number of flutes were found in this area, made either of mammoth tusk again, or of the bones of birds, the long bones of birds that have been hollowed out. And musicians can play these, and the sound that they create is extraordinary. And so for me, being an art historian is not just about saying that painting's worth X amount, that painting is by this artist. It's about taking objects and artworks from the past, putting them into their context and trying to understand their world through the art. And the Lion Man for me ends up with more potency, more meaning in this context than it would if it's just something we walk past in a museum case. That's why I think it really matters now. And these sorts of contextualizing dialogues really matter now. How are we doing for time? Oh, not long left, sorry. Do please send your questions over. I will do everything in my power to respond to them afterwards on social media. And at the end, I'll let you know how you can get in touch with me directly. Okay, I have got to quite well-known artworks in front of you to, again, continue this dialogue about how art history can help and how art and history together can change things. These are two prints made by Hogarth. Hogarth, very influential and important English artist, working in certainly in a period of great change in the 18th century. So these were both made in 1751. William Hogarth made them in direct response to a need. There was a moment of change happening around him, and he made art in response to that. What was the problem? What needed changing? The problem was gin. And the problem had come from the first Gin Act of 1736. Before that, gin was encouraged. Instead of importing wines from the continent, English people were told to brew their own gin, but it was a market that was not being supervised, and poor quality gin was starting to be distributed cheaply. It was being mixed up with turpentine. It was causing real social decay and decline. So what you can see on the right of the screen is Gin Lane. Now, this is St. Giles in London, as I say, 1751. What was starting to come to light in social documents, in statistics and medicine around this time was that gin was actually leading to death, decay, and poverty. So throughout this image, there are symbols that Hogarth has included to show what gin will do to you. The focal point, of course, is this woman on the stairs. And she is slouched sideways. She has obviously some sort of skin complaint on her legs, and she is reaching for her snuff box. And she's so unaware of what's happening to her because her mind is addled by gin that she is dropping her baby. Her baby is falling to its death. And this is hard-hitting art. That is so unmissable within the image. But then when you start to go deeper into the image, you can see other details. So everything is in decay behind. The buildings are falling down. There are people being put into coffins. Absolute chaos. The only place that is thriving is the pawnbrokers. And you can see the 3 gold coins there to designate that this is a pawnbroker. So people are selling everything they have in order to keep getting gin, which they are addicted to, which is ruining their lives. Now, Hogarth designed this print as a pair to be shown with Beer Street, the image you can see on the left. And Beer Street is in a similar area. You can see the same spire being reflected in the background, but it's a different area of London that people are not drinking gin, they're drinking beer. And here they are industrious. You can see the woman in Gin Lane is mirrored by this lovely looking lady surrounded by vegetables and fish, and everybody is plump, healthy, they're eating, there's art and creativity taking place. The artist is a fascinating character who seems to have come out of one world and into the other to paint this scene of sort of rural idyll, people dancing in that image he's painting. They're rebuilding the buildings, they are reading, they're industrious. So why did he do this? Because Hogarth, along with other teams of reformers at the time, was so distressed about poverty in London. They wanted to bring about radical change. And this did lead to the issuing of the Gin Act in 51. And that was supposed to reduce the consumption of spirits. And that meant that gin distilleries had to go through licensed merchants, and change was brought about. There was more investment in the beer industry, and it was a slow form of philanthropy and transformation that was really trying to help London come out of a very dark period. Art making a change, art at the heart of change, and art as a document of change. That is what these images show us. So this is what was printed alongside Gin Lane. And this tells us a lot about Hogarth as an artist. And again, when I'm talking about context, we've got to reach out for all this evidence. Who else was writing at the time? What were they saying? What was the change? This is the inscription. It was priced at one penny each, 2 large prints designed and etched by Mr. Hogarth called Beer Street and Gin Lane. A number will be printed in a better manner for the curious, so there's a better quality version. And on Thursday will be published 4 prints on the same subject of cruelty, prize, and the same. So he did the 4 stages of cruelty as well, all trying to kind of, I suppose, morally educate people through his artworks. And they were shocking artworks. They were different to high art of the time, art of the academy. And they were not just designed for the rich and the wealthy. You can see here these were affordable. And what he goes on to say is that the author has published them in the cheapest manner possible, to be had at the Golden Head and Leicester Fields. That he is selling his works to everyone. This is art that is for the public. And that is what I think makes Gin Lane and Beer Street so important as examples of how art can bring about change, because messages can get out there and they can influence the right people, and we can see the effects of it years later. Now, before I run out of time, I wanted to engage with the issue of statues, which has been a huge one recently. Now, I am actually on the board of a number of organisations that for years and years have been trying to ask important and necessary questions about statues within the British Isles, what role they play, what value they have, and how they engage with a changing audience, and an audience that has different needs and interests. So I want to give you 4 different versions of what can be done with problematic statues. The first is an encounter I had when I was in Baku in Azerbaijan. And you can see here a statue of the Bolshevik leader Sergey Kirov. This is from the 50s, this image here. And on the right is the platform today. What has happened is it is still the highest point. It's called the Western Viewpoint, and it looks out over the coast of the city. And you climb up the same staircase to get to it, but nothing is there. It is a purely empty marble platform. What you have instead is a view of these new monuments, the flame towers. The flame being such an important symbol of Azerbaijan, linking back to Zoroastrianism, and the idea that, in the country you can find places where fire actually comes out of the earth naturally still. So the flame towers, they're such an important symbol. And what has gone is a leader that represented the conquest of Azerbaijan by the Soviets. And there's a complicated story behind it, because Kirov, the man you can see here, he helped capture Baku in 1920, but he went on to become so popular that he became a threat to Stalin. And he was ultimately assassinated. We don't know exactly by whom, but it seems to be connected to Stalin. And interestingly, it's Stalin himself who, as he goes on to consolidate areas like Baku, commissioned the building of this statue as a martyr statue to Kirov. And in 1991, when the country gained its independence, you can see below this very, I've watched the video footage, it takes place very, very slowly, but you see these men on cranes slowly taking the statue apart, taking it down piece by piece. And what's left underneath is also very powerful. This is the sort of crypt area underneath the platform, and it's a bit. I mean, it's not accessible now. But what you can see is that there's a face of Lenin that's been attacked. There are images there that have been deliberately attacked in this act of independence. So this is destruction. And it's remained as a symbol of that through its context. We can understand the statue, we can understand where it was, and what these lasting attacks show us about the cry for independence that was coming out of Azerbaijan in the 90s. Another idea that, of course, is important when we think about display is using spaces to display changing contemporary concerns. So the 4th Plinth in Trafalgar Square is a fascinating example of this. These are just 2 of the artworks that have been exhibited on the 4th Plinth. So you've got Alison Lapper Pregnant by Mark Quinn, and you've got Yinka Shonobare's Nelson's Ship in a Bottle. Now, both controversial, both problematic in the issues they're raising. In the case of Mark Quinn, how we conceive of nude bodies, how we've been trained to see nude bodies as a certain way, but what about looking at a pregnant, disabled woman's body with this same sort of classical beauty and treatment? And Nelson's Ship in a Bottle, these sails there made out of African fabrics, one of the first major exhibitions like this by a Black British artist, and I think quite a powerful statement about colonialism. So the Falls Plinth is ever changing. There's constantly calls for it to become permanent, but what they are records, art historical records for what is important at any given moment. We have provocative versions of sculptures. So this is the Fons Americanus that was displayed in the Turbine Hall at the Tate, and it's by Cara Walker. It's a provocative piece, deeply provocative. You can see that there are enslaved people there in boats being attacked by sharks. The whole piece is supposed to be reflecting on complex maritime histories. And what she had done is behave something like an art historian herself, although Cara says, I am no historian. And that's one of the criticisms that has been leveled at this piece, is that at times the history really does matter when you're dealing with these sorts of pieces. But she had looked back to the example of the Victoria Monument outside Buckingham Palace and wanted to create a response to it that engaged directly with the problems of empire. So in a lot of the Victorian monuments, that is the greatest time of expansion, and often on the corners, like for example on the Albert Memorial too, you have the continents represented, and it is all about this sort of idea of moving across the world, colonizing, and that is what Fons Americanus is responding to. So it's provocative and it's thought-provoking. But I think the piece that I really want to land on as a beautiful example of what an artist can do when they're given a space, a statue space, is a very recent set of sculptures. They're by Wangechi Mutu, and they're called The New Ones Will Free Us. And I don't have time to show the whole video, but I will again post a link to the interview with the artist about how these were made, why they were made in this way. I think they are absolutely beautiful artistically, in as much as they have been the patinas that she's put onto these writhing textures and ropes are fascinating. But Wangechi says herself, this is about caryatids, those ancient classical caryatids, women holding up classical buildings with their arms. What she said is she doesn't want women holding things up anymore. She wants them to stand and look out confidently. And she's used these beautiful discs that are highly, highly polished, so they act like mirrors. And where they're positioned, people walking past, they see themselves in the mirror. So it draws others into the artwork. It creates a dialogue. Now, if I show you where they're exhibited, there were 4 empty spaces outside the Metropolitan Museum. And this was a commission to fill those 4 spaces. And I think they work remarkably well. Now, lockdown came at a point where they were going to be exhibited, where they were going to be launched. They deserve recognition, because this is a time where we cannot ignore what is taking place around us. We cannot keep our eyes shut. And I, as an art historian, can't either. But we need to keep talking. We need to be having constructive, creative, thought-provoking and understanding dialogue as we go forward. I am so honoured to be a patron of NSEAD at this pivotal moment, and I want us to keep really exploring why art matters, why history matters, and how we can bring that into education from nursery to tertiary and beyond. I've got to stop the presentation now, but thank you all so much for listening to me.
The really difficult thing about these online sessions is the lack of applause, but I know that out there it's deafening. What can I say? I can only just quote back at you, Janina, what you just said. Provocative and thought-provoking. You've asked us to do that. You have modelled it for us. Thank you so much. You guys, this is a clarion call to NSEAD members and members of the art education community everywhere. If you're not a member, why not? Why would you not want to be a member of an army led by generals such as this? And on that point, I'd like to take the opportunity to formally welcome Dr. Janina Ramirez to the Society as patron. She joins an illustrious line of patrons stretching back to 1888. We are incredibly honoured and proud to have you on board, and yeah, absolutely inspired. You've told us that art's a vehicle for change. You've channeled the generosity of Hogarth today. I really do love the idea that you, our patrons, our members, our friends, share your ideas, you make them widely accessible, and this keynote, free to all, is a fantastic example of that. So thank you once again. Welcome to the Society, and we're ready to follow.
Thank you. It's an honour. I'm actually a bit emotional. This is an emotional talk to give, and you know, the thing I say over and over again in any platform I get is we have to keep being kind to each other and listening. It's not about shouting each other down now. It's about dialogues and listening. And an organisation like NSEAD is really listening to everybody. So become members, join up, let's make a change, and let's really see a creative explosion over the next few years.
Oh.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Right.